Weddings are supposed to be celebrations of love, but for me, they've always carried an air of bittersweet nostalgia. My cousin Emily's big day was no different. A perfect setting under a canopy of golden lights, laughter echoing through the air, and love radiating from every corner. Yet, amid the joy, I couldn't shake a growing unease. My wife, Sarah, looked breathtaking in her emerald green gown, the one I had bought her for occasions just like this. She was the life of the party, mingling effortlessly with family and friends, her laughter a melodic counterpoint to the string quartet playing softly in the background. I tried to match her energy, chatting with relatives, but I kept glancing her way, unable to quell a gnawing feeling in my gut. Then came the dance. Sarah seemed to spend a lot of time with Brian, the groom's best man. They laughed and swayed under the soft glow of the fairy lights. Brian's hand lingered too long on her waist, his whispered words causing her to throw her head back in laughter. Could have been innocent, except it didn't feel that way. I brushed off my doubts. It was a wedding, and everyone was in high spirits. Brian was charming and Sarah's friend long before we met. Yet, as the night wore on, I noticed them slipping away from the crowd more often, their conversations just out of earshot, their shared glances too intimate. It wasn't until the cake was being served that I realized they were both gone. I looked around the room, scanning every table, every cluster of guests. My heart sank. Sarah wasn't with the other wives or chatting with Emily. Brian wasn't with the groomsmen. "Have you seen Sarah?" I asked one of Emily's friends. She shrugged, offering a vague, "Last I saw, she was heading toward the gardens." The gardens. My chest tightened as I excused myself, weaving through the throngs of happy guests toward the side exit. The air outside was cool, a welcome reprieve from the heat of the ballroom, but it did little to calm my nerves. I moved quickly, the soft crunch of gravel under my shoes the only sound as I followed the winding path toward the gazebo. And there they were. Sarah stood close to Brian, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Their faces were illuminated by the soft glow of a lantern hanging above. Whatever they were saying was too quiet for me to hear, but their body language spoke volumes. I should have called out, demanded an explanation, but I couldn't. Instead, I froze, watching as Sarah leaned in closer to Brian. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, and the carefully constructed life we had built together started to crack under the weight of this one moment. I don't remember making the decision to move closer. My feet carried me forward, each step feeling heavier than the last. I stayed in the shadows, careful not to let the gravel underfoot betray my presence. I needed to hear them, needed to know if my worst fears were true or if this was just my imagination running wild. Sarah's laugh, soft but unmistakable, floated through the night. She leaned back slightly, her hand still resting on Brian's arm. His face was inches from hers, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "You're really playing with fire, you know that?" Brian murmured, his voice carrying just enough for me to catch. Sarah tilted her head, her hair catching the lantern's light. "Am I? You seemed to enjoy the heat earlier." My chest constricted as if someone had driven a spike through it. Earlier? My mind raced, filling in blanks I didn't want to imagine. Brian reached up, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. A gesture too intimate for two people who were just friends. I should have confronted them right then and there, but something held me back. Maybe it was the fear of hearing the truth or the public spectacle it would cause at Emily's wedding. Instead, I pulled out my phone, heart pounding, and snapped a picture. The faint click of the camera app was inaudible beneath their whispers. "What about him?" Brian asked, his tone teasing but probing. "What about him?" Sarah replied. She didn't move away from him, didn't even hesitate. "He's probably inside, chatting with your sister or making small talk with the cousins." That was it. Hearing her dismiss me so easily, so casually, it broke something in me. I stepped into the lantern's glow, my face a mask of barely contained anger. "Actually," I said, my voice cold and steady, "he's right here." The way Sarah froze told me everything I needed to know. She whipped around, her eyes wide, mouth opening as if to speak, but no words came out. Brian's smirk disappeared in an instant, replaced by a stunned expression. We were just... Sarah stammered, taking a step toward me, her hand outstretched. I held up my hand, stopping her in her tracks. Save it. Brian, for all his smooth confidence earlier, looked like a deer caught in headlights. Hey man, it's not what it looks like, he started, his voice shaky. I turned my gaze to him, sharp and unforgiving. Brian, if I were you, I'd leave. Now. He hesitated, looking between Sarah and me, but the weight of my glare must have convinced him. Without another word, he turned on his heel and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. Sarah and I stood there, the silence between us more deafening than the noise of the party inside. She looked at me, her eyes pleading, but I refused to give her an inch. What the hell was that, Sarah? I demanded, my voice low but firm. It's not what you think, she said quickly, stepping closer. We were just talking. That's all. Talking? I repeated, the bitterness dripping from my tone. That's what you call sneaking away from the wedding to meet him in the gardens? Laughing and touching like that? Her cheeks flushed, her eyes darting away. I swear, it didn't mean anything. Didn't mean anything? I echoed, my voice rising slightly. How long has this been going on? How many times have you two had your little talks? Her silence spoke louder than any words ever could. Sarah stood there, her hands clasped together as if she could physically hold the pieces of her crumbling lie. She finally looked up at me, tears pooling in her eyes. Please, can we talk about this somewhere private? She whispered, her voice trembling. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. Private? Sarah, we're already away from everyone else. Or is it privacy you need so you can spin another story? No, she said a little too loudly. Her voice cracked, and she lowered it again. That's not it. This isn't the place for this conversation. Oh, now you care about appearances? I shot back, my anger boiling over. You didn't seem to mind sneaking out here with Brian at a wedding where half our family is inside. But sure, let's make sure no one overhears this part. She flinched, and for a second, I felt a pang of guilt. Then I remembered the way she leaned into him, the way she dismissed me like I was nothing. That guilt evaporated in an instant. Fine, I said, my voice firm. Let's go inside. Right now. Let's have this conversation where everyone can hear it. Please no, she begged, stepping closer and grabbing my arm. Her grip was tight, desperate. Don't make a scene. You'll ruin everything. I jerked my arm away, my jaw tightening. You already ruined everything, Sarah. But fine. Let's go somewhere private. Lead the way. She hesitated for a moment before turning back toward the ballroom. I followed her, maintaining enough distance that it felt like an abyss had opened between us. She led me to a side corridor just past the restrooms, where the noise from the party faded into a muffled hum. Okay, she said, spinning around to face me. Her mascara had started to smudge, her tears streaking the carefully applied makeup. Can we please just take a breath and talk about this rationally? Rationally, I repeated, my voice sharp. Fine. Start talking. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, like she was searching for the right words. It's not what you think, she said finally, her voice wavering. Brian and we've just been close lately, but it's nothing serious. I swear. Close? I said, the word tasting sour as it left my mouth. And what does that mean exactly? Close like friends? Or close like sneaking away at a wedding to flirt in the gardens? She wrung her hands, her gaze dropping to the floor. I never meant for it to be like this, she whispered. It just happened. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the hallway. It just happened? I repeated, my voice cold. That's your excuse? What, you tripped and fell into an emotional affair? It wasn't like that, she snapped, finally looking up at me, her face flushed with frustration. Brian's been going through a lot lately. His breakup, his issues at work. I was just trying to be there for him. Things got complicated. Complicated? I said, the word dripping with disbelief. So complicated that you didn't think to talk to me, your husband, about it? Or was that too much effort? Her eyes brimmed with tears again, and she reached for me, but I stepped back, out of her reach. I love you, she said, her voice breaking. I never stopped loving you. It's been hard lately. You've been so busy. And I felt alone. Her words hit like a punch to the gut. So what? Instead of telling me you turned to Brian? You thought that would fix things? I didn't plan for this to happen, she whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't want it to, but it's not like we did anything. I stared at her, my heart pounding. You expect me to believe that? Her silence was deafening. I stared at Sarah, my chest rising and falling as I tried to control the storm brewing inside me. Her silence, her downcast eyes. It was the confession she wasn't saying. The truth hung in the air between us, a weight neither of us could ignore. Tell me the truth, Sarah, I said, my voice quieter now, but no less intense. All of it. If there's even a shred of hope for us to move forward, I need the truth. Right now. Her lip quivered, and she looked at me like I just asked her to walk across fire. I told you, she began, her voice barely audible. Nothing happened. Stop lying. I snapped, my patience finally snapping with it. I saw the way you looked at him, the way he touched you. Do you think I'm blind? Or just stupid? Her head shot up, her tears now streaming freely. I'm not lying, she cried, her voice echoing down the empty hallway. We didn't sleep together. I swear on everything we didn't. But, I prompted, my voice laced with venom. There's always a but, isn't there? She wiped at her face with trembling hands, her shoulders shaking. But I let it get too far, she admitted. We've been texting. A lot. Talking. Meeting for coffee. And yes, tonight, it felt wrong. I knew it felt wrong, but I don't know. You don't know? I repeated, my voice flat. You don't know why you've been sneaking around with another man? You don't know why you felt comfortable laughing with him like that while I was inside, completely clueless. Her hands flew to her mouth as a sob escaped her. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I've been feeling lost. And Brian, he was just there. He made me feel seen. The words stabbed deep, cutting past my anger and into the raw, aching hurt underneath. Seen, I repeated, my voice trembling. Sarah, I've been here. Every single day. How could you say I don't see you? Her sobs grew louder, but I felt no urge to comfort her. Not now. Not after everything. I don't know how it got this bad, she choked out. I never meant to hurt you. I needed someone to talk to. And what about me? I said, my voice rising again. Why couldn't you talk to me? Why did it have to be him? She shook her head, her words tumbling out in a mess of emotion. I tried so many times, but you were always so busy with work or family or anything else. I felt like I was disappearing, like I didn't matter anymore. That's your excuse? I shot back. Because I was busy? So you found someone else to fill the gap. Her sobs quieted, and she looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. It wasn't like that, she said weakly. I didn't replace you. I made a mistake. I let out a bitter laugh, running a hand through my hair. A mistake, I echoed. Is that what we're calling it now? I don't know what else to say, she said, her voice cracking again. I never stopped loving you. Please, you have to believe me. I shook my head, taking a step back. I don't know what to believe anymore, Sarah. All I know is that you didn't think I was worth the truth until now. Her face crumpled, and she reached for me again. Please, she begged. Don't give up on us. We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes. Just, please don't give up. I stared at her, 1,000 thoughts racing through my mind. Anger, betrayal, sadness, love. They all battled for dominance. And in that moment, I realized I didn't have an answer for her. I turned away from Sarah, pressing my hands against the cool wall of the hallway as I tried to steady my breathing. The weight of her words hung heavy in the air, suffocating me. I didn't know how to move forward, but I knew I couldn't stay there in that moment, feeling like the ground had been ripped out from under me. "Does anyone else know?" I asked, my back still to her. My voice came out quieter than I intended, but no less sharp. "Brian's friends? His family? Anyone here tonight?" "No," she said quickly, her voice thick with desperation. "No one knows. It's only been us, and I swear, it hasn't gone further than what you saw." I let out a bitter chuckle. "What I saw was enough, Sarah." She didn't reply, and the silence between us stretched long and taut. Finally, I turned to face her again, my arms crossed tightly over my chest. Her makeup was streaked, her cheeks flushed red. She looked wrecked, but it did little to soften the ache in my chest. "Do you think Emily deserves to find out about this at her wedding?" I asked, my tone icy. "Do you think your little side act with Brian deserves to overshadow her day?" Her eyes widened in alarm.
"No."
"Of course not." "I'd never." "Then maybe you should go back inside," I interrupted. "Smile for the pictures, laugh at the toasts, and pretend like you're not ripping your husband's heart out." Sarah flinched, visibly recoiling from my words. She wiped at her face, then nodded slowly. "You're right," she said, her voice trembling. "I should go. But what about us? Are you going to tell anyone?" I narrowed my eyes at her. "I don't know, Sarah. I haven't had time to plan my next move between finding out my wife betrayed me and standing here in this hallway." Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she gave a tiny nod. Without another word, she turned and walked back toward the ballroom. I waited until she disappeared around the corner, then leaned back against the wall, sliding down until I was sitting on the cold tile floor. My hands trembled as I rubbed them over my face, trying to piece together what to do next. Inside the ballroom, laughter and music continued to fill the air, oblivious to the destruction happening just outside its doors. I thought about Brian, mingling with guests like nothing had happened. I thought about Sarah, putting on a mask to convince everyone she was still the doting wife. And I thought about me, sitting in a quiet hallway, my world shattered. Couldn't go back inside. Not yet. Not like this. Pulling out my phone, I stared at the photo I had taken of Sarah and Brian. The image was blurry, the moment half-lit by the lantern, but it was enough. Enough to remind me that this wasn't a nightmare I could wake up from. It was real, and I couldn't pretend otherwise. A text notification popped up on my screen, startling me. It was from my sister, Lily. "Where are you? Toasts are starting soon. Don't miss it." I stared at the message, my chest tightening. How could I sit there, pretending everything was fine, while my wife's betrayal lingered fresh in my mind? How could I face Brian, knowing what he'd done? But as much as I wanted to run, to escape this nightmare, I couldn't let my pain ruin Emily's night. She deserved better. I owed her that much. Forcing myself to my feet, I straightened my tie and smoothed my jacket. I stared at my reflection in a nearby glass door, practicing a neutral expression until I thought I could fool at least half the room. Then, with a deep breath, I pushed open the door to the ballroom and stepped back inside. The warmth of the crowd and the clink of glasses hit me like a wave, but I didn't let myself falter. If Sarah could wear a mask, so could I. The ballroom felt suffocating the moment I stepped back inside. The air, thick with laughter and clinking glasses, only amplified the chaos in my head. I scanned the crowd, catching sight of Sarah near the dessert table. She was talking to Emily's mother, her posture too stiff, her smile too wide. She was trying, but I could see the cracks in her performance. I wondered if anyone else could. I didn't have time to dwell on it. Emily's voice rang out, cheerful and bright, cutting through the chatter. She stood at the head table with her new husband, raising her glass. "If I could have everyone's attention, we're about to start the toasts." The crowd quieted, everyone turning their attention to the couple. I stayed near the back, clutching a glass of champagne I didn't remember picking up. My sister Lily waved at me from a nearby table, motioning for me to join her. I gave a small shake of my head, hoping she'd let it go. Thankfully, she did. One by one, family members and friends took the mic, sharing funny anecdotes and heartfelt wishes for Emily and her husband. I watched, barely registering the words, my eyes darting back to Sarah every few moments. She sat at our table, her hands clasped tightly around her glass. Brian was 2 tables over, laughing at a joke someone made. The sight of him made my stomach churn. When Emily's father finished his toast, there was a round of applause, and I thought the worst of the night was over. Then Emily turned to look at me, a grin spreading across her face. And now, a toast from my cousin, the guy who's always been like a brother to me. Come on up, Adam. The room erupted into cheers and laughter, and my stomach dropped. I froze, every nerve in my body screaming at me to stay put. But Emily was already looking at me expectantly, her eyes sparkling. Couldn't let her down. With a forced smile, I made my way to the mic, my legs feeling like lead. The crowd cheered again as I reached the front, and I glanced briefly at Sarah. She looked pale, her knuckles white as she gripped her glass. Brian's smirk, however, was unmistakable. I cleared my throat, gripping the microphone tightly. Well, Emily, where do I even start? My voice sounded steadier than I expected, but my mind raced, every word feeling like it might betray the storm inside me. You've always been like a sister to me, and seeing you so happy today, it's really something. The crowd chuckled softly, and Emily smiled, her hands clasped together. I kept going, pushing through the words like they were weights dragging me down. Blake, you're a lucky guy. And Emily, you deserve all the happiness in the world. My voice faltered slightly on the last word, but I pressed on. Marriage is about trust and loyalty. It's about being there for each other, even when things get tough. And if you can hold on to that, you'll have a beautiful life together. I caught Sarah's gaze for a split second, her eyes brimming with tears. Brian shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding my stare. It was a small victory, but it wasn't enough to dull the ache in my chest. To Emily and Blake, I said, raising my glass. The room echoed my toast, their cheers blending into a cacophony that I barely heard. I stepped down, handing the mic back to Emily, who hugged me tightly. That was perfect, she whispered, her smile radiant. I forced a smile back, nodding. Anything for you. As I walked back to my seat, I felt the weight of everyone's eyes on me, Sarah's included. I couldn't bring myself to look at her, though. Not yet. Not while my chest still burned with betrayal. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of small talk and forced laughter. I played my part, but inside, I was unraveling. Every glance between Sarah and Brian, every whispered conversation that I now questioned, replayed in my mind like a broken record. I didn't know how the night would end, but I knew one thing for sure. It wouldn't end the same way it had begun. As the night dragged on, I felt like a spectator in my own life. People swirled around me, clinking glasses, swapping stories, and dancing under the glittering chandeliers. I smiled when I was supposed to, nodded at the right moments, and laughed when the crowd did. But inside I was empty. Sarah, to her credit, played her role flawlessly. She stayed glued to family members, never giving me or Brian a moment alone with her. But every so often, our eyes would meet, and the tension between us would flare like a live wire. She looked desperate, pleading silently, but I had nothing to give her. I found myself outside again, this time on the terrace overlooking the garden. The cool night air did little to soothe the fire in my chest. I leaned against the railing, staring at the dark expanse below, when I heard the soft creak of the terrace door behind me. "Hey!" a voice said cautiously. I turned to see Lily stepping out, her arms wrapped around herself against the chill. "Hey!" I replied, my voice flat. She came to stand beside me, her gaze following mine into the darkness. "You've been quiet tonight," she said after a moment. "Even for you." I shrugged, not trusting myself to speak. But Lily knew me too well to let it go. "Something's wrong," she said, her tone firm. What is it? Did something happen? I hesitated. My first instinct was to brush her off, to keep this mess contained. But the weight of the night was crushing me, and I felt like I might explode if I didn't let at least some of it out. Yeah, I said finally, my voice low. Something happened. She turned to face me fully, her brows knitted in concern. What do you mean? I took a deep breath, debating how much to tell her. It's Sarah, I admitted, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. She's been lying to me. Lily's eyes widened, her hand flying to her mouth. Oh my God, Adam, what happened? Did she? I don't know. I cut her off, my voice sharper than I intended. I shook my head, trying to collect my thoughts. I caught her sneaking off with Brian. They've been close, too close, and she admitted to some of it, but she swears it's not what it looks like. Lily's expression darkened, and she looked back toward the ballroom. That slime ball, she muttered. I always thought Brian was a creep, but Sarah? I didn't think she'd. Neither did I interrupted. But here we are. She placed a hand on my arm, her grip firm. What are you going to do? I let out a bitter laugh. I have no idea, I admitted. Confront her? Leave her? Try to fix it? I don't even know where to start. Lily nodded slowly, her face thoughtful. Whatever you do, you don't have to do it alone, she said. You've got me. You've got family. We'll figure this out. Her words offered a small comfort, but the knot in my chest didn't loosen. Thanks, I said quietly, but I need to handle this. Before Lily could respond, the terrace door creaked open again. I tensed, expecting to see Sarah, or worse, Brian, but it was Emily. She looked radiant, glowing with post-toast happiness. There you two are, she exclaimed, grinning as she walked toward us. I've been looking everywhere. Come on, Adam, you promised me a dance. I opened my mouth to protest, but Lily gave me a pointed look. Go, she said softly. You can deal with this later. Emily grabbed my hand before I could argue, dragging me back toward the ballroom. I forced a smile, letting her pull me into the chaos of the dance floor. As the music swelled and Emily beamed up at me, I felt the weight of the night press harder on my shoulders. Because no matter how much I tried to pretend, I couldn't ignore the truth. The cracks in my marriage weren't just showing. They were threatening to swallow me whole.
Months had passed since the day I discovered Claire's betrayal. In that time, we had made progress, but the journey was anything but easy. There were still moments when the pain hit me like a fresh wound, when I saw her texting someone and my mind went to dark places, or when a stray thought reminded me of the man she had chosen over me, if only temporarily. But there were also moments of connection, moments where the love we once shared peeked through the cracks of our broken foundation. The journal became a constant presence in our lives, filled with raw honesty and tentative hope. Therapy helped us uncover the parts of our marriage that had gone neglected long before Bob entered the picture. Still, the question remained, could I truly forgive her? Could I move past what she had done and rebuild our life together? One night, Claire handed me an envelope. She seemed nervous, fidgeting as I opened it. Inside was a letter written in her neat handwriting. Matt. If you're reading this, it means I've finally found the courage to put my feelings into words. I know I've said I'm sorry 1,000 times, but I need you to understand how deeply I regret everything I've done. I didn't just betray you, I betrayed myself, our kids, and the life we built together. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know that every step I've taken since the day you found out has been for you, for us. I've cut Bob out of my life completely. I've confronted the reasons behind my actions, even when it was hard to face the ugly truths about myself. And through it all, I've realized one thing, I still love you. If you choose to leave, I'll understand. But if there's even the smallest part of you that wants to try, I promise I'll spend the rest of my life proving to you that I'm worthy of your love again. Yours, Claire. I read the letter twice, my chest tightening with each word. It wasn't a perfect apology, nothing could be, but it was honest. vulnerable. And it made me realize that she was just as scared of losing me as I was of being hurt again. That weekend, we went to the beach as a family. It was one of those rare sunny days where everything seemed lighter, brighter. Watching Claire play with the kids, hearing their laughter echo across the sand, I felt something shift inside me. For so long, I had been holding on to the pain, letting it define every interaction, every decision. But in that moment, I realized I didn't want to live like that anymore. I didn't want to let the affair dictate the rest of my life. That night, after the kids were in bed, I sat down with Claire. She looked at me, her eyes filled with worry. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Nothing," I said softly. I wanted to tell you something." Her hands trembled slightly as she waited. "I've decided to stay," I said. "But I need you to understand something. This isn't about forgetting what happened, or pretending it didn't hurt. It's about choosing to move forward. Choosing us." Tears streamed down her face as she reached for my hand. "I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you," she whispered. I nodded, my voice steady. "We'll take it one day at a time." The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. I knew there would be setbacks, moments of doubt, and days where the wounds felt fresh again. But for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope, a belief that maybe, just maybe, we could build something stronger from the rubble. As we sat there together, hand in hand, I realized that forgiveness wasn't a single act. It was a choice I would have to make every day. And for now, I was willing to try.
I stayed silent, staring out over the dark garden below as Sarah's sobs filled the air behind me. Her apologies, her pleas. They swirled around me like smoke, suffocating yet intangible. I gripped the cold metal of the railing, the only anchor I had in this moment of chaos. "Adam," she said after a long pause, her voice quieter now, "please don't give up on us. I'll do anything to make this right. Just tell me what to do." I turned to face her, my anger bubbling just beneath the surface. "You don't get to ask me that, Sarah. You don't get to put this on me." Her face crumpled, and she reached for me again, but I stepped back. "Do you have any idea how humiliating this is?" I said, my voice trembling with barely restrained fury. "How it feels to look at you and not know who you are anymore." "I'm still me," she said desperately. "I'm still your wife." "No," I said sharply. "You're the woman who betrayed me, who lied to me. You can't just erase that." She flinched, and I saw her fight back fresh tears. "I was weak," she admitted. "I was stupid. But I love you, Adam. I love us. Doesn't that mean anything?" I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping me. "Love doesn't mean much when there's no trust, Sarah. And right now I don't trust you." Her tears flowed freely now, but I felt no urge to comfort her. This wasn't something I could fix for her, and it wasn't something she could fix with words. The terrace door creaked open, and we both turned to see Brian stepping out, his expression hesitant. He froze when he saw me, his hands shoved into his pockets like a scolded child. "Hey," he said awkwardly, avoiding my eyes. "Can we, talk?" The audacity of him made my blood boil. "Talk," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "You want to talk?" "Adam, please," Sarah said quickly, stepping between us. "Don't make a scene." "A scene," I snapped. He already made a scene, sneaking around with my wife. "You think I care about keeping this quiet?" Brian raised his hands in a mock gesture of surrender. "Look, man, I get it. You're mad. But nothing serious happened. Okay? We just don't—" I interrupted, my voice cutting through his weak explanation. "Don't insult me by pretending this wasn't serious. You crossed a line, Brian. And you knew exactly what you were doing." He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he said finally. "I swear." I stepped closer, my fists clenched at my sides. "You didn't mean to hurt me? That's your excuse? You knew Sarah was married. You knew she was my wife. But you didn't mean to hurt me?" Adam, stop, Sarah pleaded, her voice shaking. Please, just let it go. I turned to her, my anger now directed at both of them. Let it go, I repeated. How can I let it go when neither of you seems to understand what you've done? Brian took a step back, his face pale. Maybe I should just... Yeah, I said coldly, pointing toward the door. Maybe you should. He didn't wait for me to say it twice. He turned and disappeared back inside, leaving Sarah and me alone once again. She sank onto one of the terrace chairs, her head in her hands, while I remained standing, my chest heaving. I don't know how to fix this, she said finally, her voice muffled. But I want to try. I'll do whatever it takes, Adam. Just don't walk away. I stared at her, my heart heavy with anger, pain, and something I couldn't quite name. Maybe it was love, or maybe it was just the memory of it. Either way, I knew we couldn't stay here, trapped in this moment of destruction. We'll talk about this later, I said, my voice flat. But right now I need space. Her head shot up, her eyes wide with fear. You're leaving. I'm staying at the wedding, I said firmly. For Emily. But after that, I don't know. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and final. Without waiting for her response, I turned and walked back inside, the warmth and noise of the ballroom hitting me like a wave. But even surrounded by people, I'd never felt more alone. The wedding wound down as the night grew late. The newlyweds had danced their last dance. The guests were trickling out, and the staff had started clearing away the remnants of a perfect celebration. To everyone else, it had been a magical evening. A storybook start to Emily and Blake's married life. But for me, it had been the night my own marriage unraveled. I hadn't seen Sarah for the past hour, and I wasn't sure if that was by her choice or mine. I sat at a quiet corner table, nursing what must have been my fifth drink, though I couldn't taste it anymore. The numbness was a small relief, dulling the sharp edges of everything I had felt that night. Adam. Emily's voice pulled me from my haze. She stood beside me, still radiant in her wedding dress, her face glowing with the happiness of the day. Hey, you okay? You've been kind of distant. I forced a smile. Yeah, I said, my voice hoarse. Just tired, that's all. It's been a long day. She frowned, clearly not buying it, but she didn't press. Well, Blake and I are heading out. I just wanted to say thank you. For everything. For being here. I stood, pulling her into a hug. Anything for you, Em, I said, my voice steadying for her sake. You deserve all the happiness in the world. Her smile widened, and she hugged me tighter. I love you, Adam. Don't forget that. Okay? I won't. I promised, my chest tightening. She pulled away, her eyes scanning my face like she wanted to say something else. But then Blake called her name, and she gave me one last smile before leaving. I watched as they walked hand in hand toward the exit, the perfect picture of newlywed bliss. When they were gone, I grabbed my jacket and headed outside. The cool night air sobered me slightly as I walked to my car. I hadn't made any decisions about what came next, but I knew I couldn't avoid it any longer. Sarah was waiting near our car, her arms wrapped around herself against the chill. Hey, she said softly as I approached. Hey, I replied, my tone neutral. She stepped closer, her eyes searching mine. Are you coming home? I hesitated, the weight of the question pressing down on me. Not tonight, I said finally. I need time to think. Her face fell, but she nodded slowly. I understand, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I opened the car door, pausing for a moment. I'm not making any promises, Sarah, I said, but if there's any chance of fixing this, it's going to take more than words. She nodded again, her tears catching the faint glow of the parking lot lights. I'll do whatever it takes, she said. I mean that, Adam. I didn't respond. Instead, I slid into the driver's seat and started the engine. As I pulled out of the lot, I saw her standing there, watching me leave. The image stayed with me as I drove aimlessly through the quiet streets, unsure of where I was going. By the time I parked outside my sister Lily's house, the weight of the night had settled into my bones. I sat in the car for a long moment, staring at the darkened windows, before finally getting out and knocking on the door. Lily answered in her pajamas, her hair messy and her expression groggy. "Adam?" she said, blinking at me. "What are you doing here? Can I crash here tonight?" I asked, my voice tired. She didn't ask any questions. She just stepped aside, letting me in. Of course. I sank onto her couch, the exhaustion finally catching up with me. Lily sat beside me, handing me a blanket without a word. For the first time that night, I felt a small sense of relief. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for now, I didn't have to face it alone. In the weeks that followed, Sarah and I began the slow, painful process of untangling the mess we'd created. Trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight, and I wasn't sure if we'd ever fully repair the damage. But one thing was certain. That night at the wedding had changed everything. Sometimes one moment is all it takes to unravel years of trust. But sometimes, it's also the moment that forces you to confront what you've been ignoring. Whether that leads to healing or heartbreak is a story only time can tell.